we ask that you would help us, God. You would give us the courage, the ability to be persistent in you. God, to hear your voice, to know your ways, to see where you're leading and follow you. Lord, I pray that as we do that, God, you would identify those things that you want us to surrender. Because we recognize, God, we can do very little on our own except surrender, except obey, except just hear you and do what you ask us to do. Lord, we praise you that everything you ask is for our own good. You are about our best interest. Forgive us for the times when we think you're asking too much or you're asking to do something that's too hard. Lord, help us to see your heart. Take us back to the cross over and over again, where you did the work of dying in our place. And a God who would send his own son would never ask us to do anything except what is best. So Lord, help us to lean into you. Help us to persist. God, I pray for each person here today. Whatever you need to do in our lives, do it. Whatever you need to say it. As we look into your word, let us hear your voice. Let us understand what you have to teach us and how you want to direct us. Lord, I pray for our prayer vigil this afternoon, God, that it would be a time when you show up in such powerful ways. Lord, that all of our efforts, all of our sacrificing and praying and fasting this week would lead up to a moment where you are able to do from the heavenly realm what you desire to do. Lord, we pray that you would reach into the lives of people who don't know you, that you would do the miraculous in showing them their sin and how much you want to forgive them. God, I pray that you would work in our lives as we strive to be more like you. Show us what you need to do. Show us what you need us to do. And help us to surrender. Lord, I pray that your Holy Spirit would come with power, just as you did so often in the New Testament. In little ways, in big ways, God, that you would be free to do just exactly what you want to do. Whatever it is, God, we give ourselves to you. We surrender to you. We seek you with all that is in us. More than anything else, we want to see your glory fall on us and then radiate out from us. So in these moments, Lord, send your Spirit. Do what you need to do. Revive us, strengthen us, energize us as you fill us. Chase away all the remnants of ourself and our selfishness from our hearts and our minds and our souls so that we can be fully yours and experiencing the joy and the satisfaction that only comes as we do that. Lord, we give ourselves to you. We love you. We honor you. We praise you. We worship you. In the name of Jesus. Amen. Have you ever seen a lion? At the zoo? Have you seen it? So, did you go in and pet him? Why not? Really? A lion would hurt you. But aren't they just great big kitty cats? No? How would they hurt you? Really? They just nip you like that? What would they do? Yep, tear off your legs and arms and eat you and just leave bones, right? Yep, that's a lion. Well, we've been talking about Daniel. He was a man in the Old Testament. And this time, we find out that now he's 82 years old or so, which is a little bit older than you guys, right? No? You're about that age? No. So he's pretty old, and now we discover that he has become the most important person in all of the kingdom. And the king really likes Daniel, but all the other people, all the other leaders don't like him because they're jealous. And so they go to the king, King Darius, and said, well, you know what you ought to do, king? You ought to make a law that anybody who prays to anybody but you Anybody but you, O king, because you're most important, king. Anybody that prays to anybody but you for 30 days will be thrown in the lion's den. And the king thought, that's a good idea. I am the most important person in the kingdom, and people ought to pray to me. And so he made the decree. And then Daniel heard about it. And you know what Daniel did right away? Daniel said, well, I'm not going to pray anymore. Is that what Daniel said? No. He went home, and he went over to the window, and he threw open the windows. And he started praying to God, because that's what he did 3 times a day. Morning, lunchtime, and afternoon. 3 times a day, he would go to the window, he would open up the doors, and he would pray. Well, all the other officials saw him, because they were trying to get Daniel killed. And they went back to the king, said, King, guess what? Daniel, your favorite, is praying. And you made a decree, you made a law that can't be changed. So what are you going to do, king? The king was really upset because he liked Daniel. He knew he could trust Daniel. And so he tried to find some way out of this, but he couldn't. And that evening, Daniel was called in. And the king said, Daniel, I hope your God saves you, but I don't see how. Now think about this. 82 years old, which is kind of old, right? And facing lions. So how would you feel if lions were, see, you got a flat tire so you can't get away, and there's lions pawing at your car? What would you be thinking? Nice kitty cat. No? What would you be thinking? I hope they eat my sister instead of me, right? Is that what you're thinking? No, it'd be scary. Or how about this? How about this? There's a lion right there, and he's coming after you. Be thinking, I'm going to die, right? There's no way out of this. And that's the way Daniel felt. They threw him into the lion's den. And because Daniel said, it's more important for me to follow God, to serve God. I'm not going to stop serving God than to listen to the king. And I'll die in the lion's den if I need to. And so they threw him in. And there he is. And all of the lions are looking at him like, this is going to be a good snack. Maybe a little gristly because he's a little old. But we're going to eat him. Is that what happened? No. Look, next picture. An angel shows up and saves Daniel from the lion's den. Next, they roll a stone, and so he has to spend all night with the lions. But the angel shut their mouths, wouldn't let them attack him, protected him. Next morning, the king just couldn't sleep all night because he feels so bad. And he doesn't want Daniel to die, and he calls out, Daniel, did your God save you? And Daniel says, yes, O king, live forever. God sent an angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. And they lift Daniel out, and there wasn't even a scratch on him. Now, have you ever been around cats? Yeah. Have you ever tried to, if you're close, they scratch you, right? But here we got lions, and God didn't even let them touch him because Daniel prayed, and he didn't betray God. You see, sometimes when we face danger, when we think, oh, this would be better than God, or people make fun of us, or we think, oh, I know God wants me to do this, but I really want to do this, and we do it. That, when we betray God, then he doesn't protect us. But when we follow him, he's bigger than any lion, bigger than any problem, bigger than people making fun of us, bigger than any homework that we got to do, bigger than anything. God is bigger. But Daniel only experienced it because he was faithful to God. So, you got any lions in your house? No. Well, I'd say the lions would probably be bigger than any problem you have, right? So whatever it is, God is bigger. Right? Right? Oh, now you don't talk. All right. Ready to go to class? Stand up. What would you do if you became the next meal for a group of lions because of your loyalty to God? What kind of meal would you be? Would you be a sad meal? Oh, looking at the lions being sad. Would you be disillusioned? God, let me into the lion's den. Would you be an angry meal? Or would you be a happy meal? Because that's what Daniel was. He was thrown into the lion's den, but instead of getting angry with God or disillusioned or sad or frustrated, he praised God and he sang. And the lions couldn't touch him. We've been talking about Daniel. We've been looking in the book of Daniel. And we've discovered there are seemingly insignificant decisions that we have to make, but they have huge consequences. That was chapter 1. Impossible situations that we have to face. That was chapter 2. Allowing God to take care of things. That was chapter 3. And then last week, we've jumped ahead to chapter 10 because that was about prayer and that it is essential that we seek God with intensity and persistence, fasting and seeking Him if we're going to experience His presence in our lives. And we're going to experience the victory in the heavenly realms, in the invisible. This week, we want to back up a few chapters to chapter 6, Daniel chapter 6, and look at some truths that we learned from Daniel in a situation that was overwhelming, that could have destroyed him, but instead turned another crisis into an opportunity for God to work, but also for Daniel to be seen for who he really was. So, the first truth, if you want to pull out your outline and fill in the blanks, the first truth is that our human nature is that we live for the short term, for this life. We live for the short term, for this life. Sometimes we're like the little boy who negotiated with God in his evening prayer. Lord, if you can't make me a better boy, don't worry about it. I'm having a real good time just like I am. Sometimes we're like that. We are happy to live for the short term. Our human nature defaults to the short term. Maybe you experienced what I've experienced, is that somebody finds out that you're fasting. And they're shocked because they're not familiar with it, they don't understand it, and they wonder why in the world you would deny yourself. Why in the world would you go without something? Because they can't get past the idea that this life is what we live for, the pleasures of this life, avoiding pain at all costs. But when we don't believe that there's an invisible life, a life different from this one, a life after this one, a life more important than this one, that's the way we live. We live for the here and now, for the short term. And so we protect ourselves instead of acting in faith with courage and abandon. We try to hold on to the pleasures in this life. People will go to all kinds of measures to hold on to the things in this world, to hold on to this life, because that's what you do if you really don't believe in another life. And that's what we see in the account of Daniel chapter 6. In Daniel chapter 5, beginning with verse 30, we pick up the story. It says, that very night, Belshazzar, who was the last king of the Babylonian kingdom, was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps, which is like the officials, the governing, managing officials of the kingdom, to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. So they were the managers, they were the leaders, they were the overseers of the whole known world. Because the Babylonians had ruled the world, and now the Persian kingdom had taken over. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. So here we have Daniel. He's in his early 80s. And we don't usually think of accountants and managers as heroes of the Bible, do we? And yet, that's who Daniel was. He was just an ordinary layperson. He wasn't a preacher. He wasn't a missionary. He wasn't a prophet. He was just an ordinary accountant. Next time you go do your taxes, look in the face of the person across the desk and think, that's a hero? That's who Daniel was. He was just a manager. But it was his extraordinary dependency and trust in God that made him such a Bible hero. Daniel was one of the 3 overseers. Each one of them probably had about 40 other administrators under them, but Daniel was rising to the top. Even at age 82, Daniel was heads and shoulders above them. Why? Because he trusted in God in daily, practical ways, day after day after day after day after day. It's not the heroic climbing the mountain, it's just being loyal to God. Verse 4, at this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. Because they were focused on the short term, what they could get in this life by any means possible, instead of trying to be excellent at what they did, they tried to take Daniel down. So they looked for something. They were trying to, and notice, they looked in his conduct of government affairs, they were unable to find anything. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. They looked for some skeleton in his closet. 82 years old, they looked for, and he'd been serving since he was early 20s. So over the 60 years, they looked for some skeleton in his closet. They could find nothing, either by intent or neglect. Now, if somebody went prying around in your life and your work, would they be able to find anything that you've ever done wrong? Yes, this week, right? It wouldn't take much to look. But Daniel had so served God and was so loyal to God that there was nothing to be found. Finally, these men, verse 5 said, we will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. As they're sniffing around looking for something, they do discover one thing about Daniel, and that is absolutely loyal to God. So the administrators and the satraps went as a group to the king and said, O King Darius, live forever. 122 to 1. How would you like those odds? 122 of the top people in all of the kingdom, and Daniel is the one. But if they had known Daniel and known his God, they'd have realized that those are really bad odds. Because you plus God equals greater than anything you ever face. It doesn't matter whether it's hundreds or thousands or millions. You plus God is always a majority in every case in your life. So think of the difficult situations that you face. Think of the people in your life that are difficult to live with. You plus God is bigger than anything you ever face. That's why Daniel could be so loyal, is because he knew that he had God on his side. And there was nothing they could ever do about it. Verse 7, the royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed. Have you ever had that? You know, we have all agreed, and we want you to do something. Everybody is against Daniel. That the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or man during the next 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into the lion's den. You see, it's about Daniel, but they don't make it about Daniel. They make it about the king. That's called manipulation. Have you ever experienced that? Yeah. We are tempted to do that all the time because our default is to focus on the short-term things that we want, and so when we're focused on that, we will maneuver our way through relationships and circumstances to try to get what we want at whatever cost. The officials are playing into the culture of the Medo-Persian Empire. You see, they believed that the king was the incarnation of God. And because he was the incarnation of God, he was infallible. And so because he was infallible, once an edict had been made, once a law had been written and he signed off on it, then you couldn't go back, because if you're infallible, you never make a mistake. So they're trying to get him to sign into law a rule that they know, or a law that will cause Daniel to be killed. Darius is new at being king. He's just taken over. And so they intentionally create a situation to manipulate the king that is kind of daunting. 122 people come in. All the best and the brightest and the people that he's supposed to be able to trust. The people that are running his kingdom. They all come in as one. They come with a proposal that plays to his ego and appears to secure loyalty and then sniff out anybody who may not be on board for his kingdom. You know, when you take over a kingdom, you have to figure out who's going to be loyal. Otherwise, you're going to have a very short reign and a knife in your back. So he's thinking these people are trying to take care of him, and they are trying to figure out who might not be loyal. So it plays right into it. Darius doesn't see it coming, and I think maybe God prevented him from seeing it. Because remember, crisis creates what? Okay, 2 people have been listening for 4 weeks. Crisis creates opportunity. And so here, this crisis is going to create opportunity. And I think sometimes God intentionally puts us into situations, maybe blinding other people from doing the right thing, so that we can be in the place where he can use that opportunity for himself and for us. Verse 8, now, O king, issue the decree and put it into writing so that it cannot be altered in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. So, King Darius put the decree in writing. Without time to think about it, because urgency rarely provides best decisions. Right? Urgency rarely, and salespeople know this, don't they? I remember years ago, Sheila and I were shopping for a mattress. I'd done some research, and I kind of knew what I wanted, and so then we started going to stores. We went into the first store, and they had what we wanted, and we thought it was a good price, but I wanted to shop around. And so I'm talking to the salesperson, and he lowers the price. And I say, well, I'm really going to shop around. I had to, and then he lowers the price again. And I said, no, you don't understand. I'm not trying to get a better price. I'm just going to shop around to make sure that this is the best deal. And I get up and he says, if you walk out that door, this deal is no longer good. What are they doing? They want you to make a decision because they know if you get out the door, the chances are you're not going to come back, right? So there's this urgency, and in that moment, I said, I'm not coming back. I'm not going to be manipulated. I'm not going to be forced to do something. Turns out we went shopping, and they actually did have the best deal. Did I buy it there? Nope. I paid a few extra dollars because I don't want to be manipulated. Because urgency makes us make bad decisions. And so that's where Darius finds himself. He didn't consult Daniel, which is amazing to me. Daniel's at the very top. Daniel is the one he trusts the most. And maybe he thought Daniel was there. I mean, there's 122 people there, but it'd be kind of hard to miss the person that you trust the most, don't you think? They were living for the here and now. These 122, they were living for the here and now. Anytime we try to manipulate circumstances, instead of trust God, we're living for the here and now. Anytime we try to benefit ourselves when it harms others, we're living for the here and now. Anytime we act out of fear or selfishness, we're living for the here and now. Anytime we are in a hurry rather than trusting God, thinking that this might be our only chance to do this or have this, then we are living for the here and now. Do you think it bothered Daniel that all of this went down? Sure, I mean, he's human, right? Of course it would bother him. Here's the other 122 people that were serving in this realm with him, and they've all stabbed him in the back. That would hurt. But over his 82 years, he had learned to trust God. Learned to trust that God is bigger, that God is up to something. Crisis creates opportunity. As you look at your life, what are you living for? Our default is to live for the here and now. As you look at your life, as you look at your schedule, as you look at your checkbook, as you look at your relationships, what are you living for? Our default is the here and now. only as we lean into God, we trust Him, and we obey Him, do we live for what really lasts. That's truth number one. Truth number two is that communion with God is the core and the key of life. Communion with God is the core and the key of life. Daniel's life was integrated. He didn't have God as a compartment, but rather he was integrated into his whole life. Communion, here's the definition, is the interchange between two people. It's the connection. It's sharing life together. When we think of communion, what comes to mind? The bread and the juice. That's usually how we think of it. I almost put prayer with God as the core and the key of life, but that word doesn't really describe it either. What Daniel shows us is that it was his constant communion, constant sharing life with God that was the key and the core of his life that caused him to live for God. It's that deep connection. And that is what life is all about. Conversing with God in prayer is one of the ways that we do that. We resist believing that communion with God, relationship with God, sharing life with God is the key and the core when we think religion instead of relationship. Ritual does not provide what we're created for. And all of us have had those experiences where we do the religious things, and it doesn't lead to fulfillment and meaning. And so we kind of put God in that category and say, well, he's a compartment and I do this ritual and I keep him off my back, and we don't experience the depth of relationship that actually brings satisfaction. We resist it because that longing that is in your soul, that longing that there's something more than this life, the desire to make life make sense, to find meaning is the longing for relationship with God and with others. And every one of us have a hole in our souls that longs for that. And we look for a lot. We can even go to religion and then think God doesn't deliver what fills my soul. Daniel had discovered over his 80-some years that it is God who provides satisfaction in life. Not the religion, but the relationship. And so, and then sometimes we resist it because we think it's boring. If I focus on relationship with God, if I focus on God as the core and the key of my life, then that's just boring. Okay, Daniel has interpreted dreams. He's been ushered into the king's palace. He became vice president of the world, and now he's going to get rescued from a den of lions. Does that sound boring to you? Not at all. You see, the most exciting thing, the most satisfying thing is the times when we just live with God. It's a way of life. It's like breathing. When you wake up, it's recognizing God is there, saying good morning. When you're in your car, when you're eating meals, when you're facing difficulties, when you get anxious, when good things happen, it's just sharing life with God. It's what Joanne talked about last week when we shared about those months that after the car wreck and the recovery. It says, God is faithful, God is faithful, God is faithful. He's there. It's satisfying. It's good no matter what. Verse 10. So when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he knew once it was signed, there was nothing he could do about it. There was no power to convince the king otherwise. He went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God just as he had done before. Daniel removed himself from the court and he went to the place where there was all this turmoil going on, and he went to the place where there was peace, where there was focus, where there was satisfaction, where he could quiet his soul and his thoughts and know everything was going to be all right. He went to God. You see, this had been his habit, we could only assume, his entire life. 9 o'clock, noon, and 3 o'clock. He went to his house, opened the windows, and prayed to his God, thanking him and asking for help. For Daniel not to pray would have been to remove himself from the protection of God. And we think, well, God, he could have, it was only 30 days. He could have just set that aside, right? But Daniel knew that the issue was bigger. It wasn't about the ritual. It was about the relationship. And there is no way he was going to surrender the relationship he had that brought satisfaction and meaning and peace and confidence and hope and joy for any king. Imagine it this way. Again, it's about relationship. Imagine it this way. It comes down that our government issues a decree that you're not allowed to talk to your spouse or your children for the next 30 days. Now, some of you are going, oh, that sounds kind of nice. I mean, that would be no obligation there. I don't have to do that anymore. No, but think about it. Imagine that you love them. And the government issues a decree that you can't talk to your spouse, you can't talk to your children, or some of you, it's even worse, you can't talk to your grandchildren. You can't be with them, you can't touch them, you can't hold them, you can't be with them. What would you do? It's about relationship. It's not about religion or ritual. And if you said to your family, I'm not going to talk to you, the government issued this, how would they feel? Betrayed, right? Like, you don't really love me. You don't really care about me. What the government has to say is more important than our relationship. That's what Daniel felt. Because it wasn't about the ritual. It wasn't about the times of prayer. It was about this relationship. And he knew if he went 30 days without praying to his God, then he would remove himself from this relationship. And he couldn't bear to think about that. That's what Daniel did. It was betrayal. I put a couple of bullet points there. Compromise is death. Anytime we compromise, we're actually turning our back on God and our face towards something else. Daniel could not back away from the windows. He could have backed away from the window so he couldn't be seen, but I think he moved closer to the window so people could see, this is what I stand for. This is who I love. Daniel realized there were far greater implications to all of this. Imagine that the government made that law and you stay away from your family. You have compromised your vow to your spouse and you have abandoned your responsibility to your children and your grandchildren. You have betrayed them at the most basic level. And that's what God feels when we compromise. Compromise isn't bad because it's against the rules. It's bad because it betrays the relationship. And then the next bullet point, it is constant communion that makes us strong. It's constant communion that makes us strong. Why was it that Daniel could go all of these years without doing anything, any skeleton they could find in his closet? Because he was in communion with God and he was following God's ways. Why is it that in that moment Daniel immediately made the right decision? Because he was in communion with God and he followed God's ways. He didn't have to think about it. He didn't have to consider it. He didn't have to debate it with himself. He just did what God wanted him to do because he was in constant communion with God. You ever feel too busy to pray? Ever use that as an excuse? I have. Think about this for a moment. Daniel was prime minister of the world. Except for the king, there was no one greater with higher responsibility. You think he was a busy man? And yet he took time every day to spend time with God. 3 times a day. Prayer vigil is this afternoon, 4 to 7 this afternoon. It's about spending time with God. It's not about a ritual. In fact, if you're just doing it because it's a ritual, if you're doing it because it's religion, don't come. You just be in the way. But if you desire for God to work, if you desire to lean into Him, to know Him more deeply, if you desire to be used by Him in prayer to affect what's happening in the spiritual realm in other people's lives, then come and spend time with them. Because that's what it's about. More things are accomplished through prayer, through this kind of communion with God, than anything that happens because of our efforts. That's what the prayer vigil is about. So the question is, do you commune with God? Or is he just a compartment of your life? It's not about prayer. It's about communing. Number 3, the third truth is that relational stuff makes us blind and destroys. Relational stuff makes us blind and it destroys. The relational stuff is things like jealousy, anger, bitterness, unforgiveness, hurt that we hold on to, envy, grudges, and on and on and on. All of that stuff will cause us not to be able to be seeing reality. So we end up doing dumb things, and it will destroy us. Proverbs chapter 14, verse 30 says, "A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones." And they've done physical studies, scientific studies on people who have bad relationships, and that's exactly the truth. It rots us from the inside out. Physically, we break down and we die earlier. Back to the story, verse 11 says, "Then these men went again as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. He got down on his knees and he prayed, thanking God and then asking for help." In verse 10 it says he thanks God first. He thanks God, recognizing God's goodness. And I think the prayer probably included things like this: "God, you've been so good to me all over these 80 years. You've delivered me so many times. You put me in positions I never should have been in. You have just used me in different ways. God, I'm ready to die. So if you want to throw me in the lion's den and I go that way, that's fine. I just thank you that you've been working in my life. And God, I thank you for whatever's going to come next because I trust you." And then he said, "God, would you work in the situation? I don't really want to be mauled by lions. That's not the way I've always pictured myself going out. I don't really want to have to go through this, but God, whatever you want, it's up to you." Remember, Daniel understood crisis creates opportunity, and he was willing to trust God. And so he prayed. Verse 12, "So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree." Remember, Darius is still oblivious. He doesn't know who this is going to catch. He just is kind of puffed up with the ego that, oh, they want to pray to me. "Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or man except to you, O king, would be thrown into the lion's den?" You catch the condescending tone, the disrespect that's there? "Didn't you do this, king?" The king answered, "The decree stands, in accordance with the laws of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed." And then they dropped the hammers. They said to the king, "Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day." Gotcha, is what they said. Gotcha. They were blaming both Daniel and the king. They knew Daniel was the king's favorite, and now they tricked the king into destroying the person that was his favorite. Which just, in my mind, shows the stupidity of the group of 122. They were blind. Because, think about, excuse me, after this all plays out with Daniel, the king's still in charge. And it's going to come back to bite them. Even if Daniel had died in the lion's den, my hunch is the king would have thrown the rest of them in as well. Because a king that allows himself to be manipulated really isn't king at all. And he realized what they'd done behind them. But when we have relational stuff going on, there's jealousy or envy or bitterness or anger, we're blind to that. And we think what we do will work out. Jealousy, bitterness, unforgiveness, anger makes us blind. Verse 14, "When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. And he was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him." He was distressed. He was displeased with himself that he got manipulated, and he was angry that the one man that he felt like he could trust the most was going to die. There was nothing he could do about it. He was infallible, remember? He was the incarnation of their God. Once the edict was made, there was nothing anyone can do. So in verse 15, they come back after, I guess, a few hours of him trying to work it out. The men came back as a group to the king and said to him, "Remember, O king, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed." Again, the disrespect. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. Down he tumbled, all 82 years of him. And generally, the belief is that it was kind of a cave with a hole at the top, and they would just throw things down or people down into this den, into this cave. And so there he falls. Now, note, as a side note, you might want to write this down. A life of communion with God does not prevent us from ending up in a lion's den. Some people deride God because troubles come. God doesn't keep us out of the difficulties. He works in the difficulties. Crisis creates opportunity. So Daniel ends up thrown into the lion's den, hitting the bottom with his 82-year-old bones. The king said to Daniel, "May your God whom you serve continually rescue you." Even the king knew that Daniel's life was inseparable from his complete loyalty to God. And in that moment, the king was forced to face the fact that he was not all-powerful. He was supposed to be the incarnation of God, but he wasn't all-powerful. Now, I think we miss some of the power of God because we know the rest of the story. If I was telling you this story about someone who was living in South America and you didn't know the rest of the story, there would be this angst. It's like when you're watching a movie and you don't know how it's going to end. When you're reading a story and you don't know how it's going to end, there's this angst because you think, is this person going to die? Is this person going to... when we're praying for something and we don't know if the person is going to be okay. When somebody we know has a terrible disease and we're praying, we don't know if it's going to be okay or not. And so we miss some of this angst. Daniel didn't know what was going to happen. All he knew was he was absolutely loyal to God. And at this moment, it feels like this man, the hero of our story, is going to die. He's in a lion's den. He's surrounded by hungry lions. And he doesn't know what's going to happen next. The king doesn't know what's going to happen next. The stone was brought, verse 17, and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of the nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. The relational stuff made them blind, and so they were trying to destroy. Jealousy, anger, hurt caused the 122 officials to do something that would eventually destroy them. Now, before we move on to the fourth truth, understand this. If there's any of this relational stuff in your heart, in your life, it will cause you to be blind. And it will destroy you. Without exception, it will destroy you. That's why Jesus talks so much about forgiving. Forgiving our enemies, forgiving our friends, letting go of hurt, not holding on to any bitter root, not letting anger have control, because Jesus knows it will destroy us. It'll cause us not to be able to see reality, only to see red, and it will destroy us. So if there's any of that stuff in your life, let it go. Let God give you the ability to forgive and let it go. Which brings us to fourth number true. Truth number 4. Let's try that. Romans 8:28 always works. Romans 8:28 always works. Someone has said, when you get to your wit's end, you'll find God lives there. The good Lord didn't create anything without a purpose, someone has said, but mosquitoes come close. Coincidence is when God chooses to remain anonymous. See, Romans 8:28 always worked. The king was proud, the 122 were jealous, which led to the attack on God's man. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because Romans 8:28 always, always, always works. God is in control, working for the good, no matter what happens. He doesn't cause everything, but he works in everything for those who love him. Romans 8:28. If you haven't memorized this and have it in your mind, you ought to do that. Romans 8:28, and we know that in all things, circle all things, no exceptions, all things, God works for the good of those who love him. Circle love him. Because All things don't work together for the good of those who don't love him, who betray him, who compromise instead of being loyal to him. The promise isn't for everyone. It's only for those who love him and are willing to do what's right no matter the cost. Those who have been called according to his purpose. God always works one way or another for the good of those who love him. That's what we saw with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. God worked. They were willing to die in the fire, but God showed up. God works for good. So verse 18, then the king returned to his palace, spent the night without eating, without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. Is it ironic that the one who sent him into the lion's den is the one who's upset and distressed and can't sleep and can't eat, while the one who was sent is singing in front of the lions? When we're in discomfort, our tendency is to look to other things to dull. But the king couldn't even do that. Verse 19. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, hoping beyond hope. Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from the lions? Daniel answered, O king, live forever. Now that had to send chills up the spines of the 122 administrators, right? Because they're thinking, oh, this is not going to turn out well. We thought we killed the one who was in our way, and he survived. And we've watched the king be in anguish over this whole thing. Nobody has ever spent a night in the lion's den and lived to tell about it. Verse 22, my God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I ever done any wrong before you, O king. The world's first happy meal. There he is singing, praising God. Maybe even laughing after a while when the lions try to come after him and it's like this force shield around. Maybe that's where Star Wars got the idea. There's this force field around him and they can't get to him. They can't touch him. They can't eat him. All they can do is listen to him sing. And there's another being there, this huge being of light. The king, verse 23, was overjoyed. At that point, if you were one of the 122, it would have been a good time to head for the airport. Because bad things are going to happen. You never want to cause the king of the world an anguished night, do you? And he gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. Repeat after me. Because he had trusted in his God. Because he had trusted in his God. Now put it all together. Because he had trusted in his God. It wasn't because Daniel was such a great guy. It wasn't even because he prayed 3 times a day. It was because he trusted God. Daniel knew it wasn't about him. It was about God. If Daniel had compromised, he could have sidestepped the lion's den. But the satraps would have found something else. And the next time, instead of Daniel being so aligned with God and so in communion with God that he could stand strong, he would have taken himself out of God's protection. If you are surrendering your loyalty to God, if you are compromising what you know God wants in your life, either by the Word of God or by what He says to you, you are holding God at arm's length. You are turning your back on God and turning your face towards something else, and you are not in the protection of God. And Romans 8:28 does not apply to you. That's why loyalty is so important. That's why communing with God is so important. That's why obeying even the faintest whisper of God is so essential. It's not because He wants us to ritualistic talk to Him. It's because He wants us to be in alignment with Him where He can take care of us. Verse 24, at the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den. along with their wives and their children. The Bible here is reporting, not condoning. In fact, in the Old Testament, it was specifically instructed that nobody was held responsible for their sin except for the person who sinned. But in the Babylonian and the Persian Empire, everybody related to a person was impacted and was guilty for whatever another person did. And that's why wives, children, family members were all thrown into the lion's den. You see, when we have relational stuff, it blinds us to the impact it has on other people as well. If I have bad relationship with one person, it affects my other relationships. And I can't love fully unless I'm able to give that up. It affects us. Before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed their bones. Wonder if it crossed any of their minds. Well, they didn't eat Daniel, so maybe we're going to be okay. But by the time they hit the ground. Now, it's also interesting. There were enough lions to devour some 500 people immediately. That's how much protection Daniel was given. Then Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and men of every language throughout the land, "May you prosper greatly." So all of those, none of the administrators, none of his officials, none of his leaders are alive anymore except for Daniel. And he makes this command. He issues a decree. "May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel." Not just tolerate, not just put up with the Jewish religion, but fear and worship, hold God in awe. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will never be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. When we remember that this king was considered the incarnation of their pagan god, this announcement is nearly unbelievable. Because what he's saying to all the people in his kingdom, the Medo-Persian kingdom, in all the known world, he's saying, you know what? You think I'm God. You think I'm the incarnation of God. You think I'm infallible. I'm here to tell you that there is a God that is living, and he's greater, and he's powerful, and you have to worship him. He kind of gives up his position to apply to God. Are you fully invested in Romans 8:28? Because God works all things together for the good of those who love him, who are loyal to him, who are obedient to him, who will seek him, who will live in communion with him. Or are you anxious and worried or taking things into your own hands or compromising or protecting yourself? Crisis creates opportunity. So look to see what happens. Daniel knew that there were greater implications, so he's willing to be thrown into the lion's den, willing to be saved from all of that. And here's what happens as a result. The new king of the world comes face to face with the true God. Daniel could never have arranged that. God is to be feared and reverenced in the whole world. Daniel is revered and exalted in the whole world. The Jewish people are once again protected under the next dynasty so that they aren't persecuted in other parts of the world. And the king's court, and this is a gift to Darius, the king's court is cleaned out of men he couldn't trust. Crisis creates opportunity. In our human nature, the default is to live for the short term, whether pleasure or protection. Is that the way you're living? Communion with God and then with other people is the core and key of life. Is that how you're living? Relational stuff blinds us and destroys us. Is it you? Romans 8:28. Always, always always works, without exception. Do you love him? Are you surrendered to him so he can do that in your life? The prayer vigil is not magic. It's an opportunity to turn toward God deliberately and together, to seek God, to surrender to God, and to pray for some specific things that God would move. We have no idea what might happen in the heavenlies as we seek and surrender to God. So I invite you to let that be a moment in time when you lean into God as Daniel leaned into him. 4 to 7 this afternoon. Come and go. Plan on an hour. You can spend less or more time. There will be handouts that will guide you through the different stations, guiding you to pray. You can pray as long as you want at any station you want. But it's all about seeking and surrendering and letting God work. And God promises to show up. One way or another, he's going to show up when we seek him. Would you bow your heads? What did God say to you as we were looking at Daniel chapter 6? Did he convict you? Were there some things that he told you to surrender? Are there some areas of obedience that you've been maybe not even disobeying, just procrastinating, just putting off, thinking you'd get to it sometime? That's disobedience too. Did you hear God comforting you, encouraging you? Maybe you're facing a difficult situation and you needed to hear that as you love him, he'll work all things out. He'll work in the middle of whatever situation you're in. In these moments, surrender to God. In these moments, commit to come and give yourself fully this afternoon in seeking God. And when you do, God will be smiling from heaven because what he wants is you. Relationship with you. Lord, when we read the story of Daniel, we are overwhelmed by his unmatched loyalty to you. Lord, do whatever it takes in our lives to make us a Daniel. In the little things, God, in the daily things. Day after day, moment after moment, week after week. Make us more and more like you. God, I pray that you would forgive us for those things that we've surrendered as we paused in these moments. That you would comfort us in the places where we need that, and you would help us to feel your approval in the places where we are serving you. Lord, we pray your blessing upon the prayer vigil this afternoon. God, we just plead with you that you will be able to accomplish through that what you desire. You would make us more your people, your family, your army, your church. In the name of Jesus, we give ourselves to you. Amen. If you have made a decision today, or if you would like others to pray along with you about any need that's going on in your life, you can put that on the back of the blue card, drop it in the offering plate. Let me encourage you this afternoon, even between now and the prayer vigil, to ponder the things that we've talked about and prepare yourself. Allow God to really work in your life, work in your heart, so that when we get here to pray, God will be able to pray through us. I pray this week you will lean into Christ. And as you do, he will make you a Daniel, passionate about living for Christ, intimate with him as you live daily with Christ, and surrendered to him so others will see Christ in you. Now, let's go be the church.